All praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Makar Kwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, and Shalom to the elected nation of Israel. This video is going to be on how the Israelites are going to keep all of God's laws, right? Or pretty much, let me word it in another way, in fact. It's a video on how the Israelites, it's a video on how everyone's going to keep God's laws eventually. But there's going to be two different ways in which people are going to keep God's laws, right? That's what I meant to say. And I'll say it again. Everyone in the world is going to keep all of God's laws one day, right? But it's going to be done in two different ways. And the only people that are going to keep Yahweh's laws perfectly are the Israelites. So let me go to the Israelites first on how they're going to keep God's laws. This is Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord Yahweh. But this shall be the covenant that I make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord Yahweh. I'll put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So that's saying that there's going to come a day where every single Israelite is going to keep all of Yahweh's laws perfectly, right? They're going to keep all of God's laws perfectly. Verse 34, and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith Yahweh. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I remember their sin no more. So this is the way that the Israelites are going to keep Yahweh's laws. They're going to keep it perfectly, and there's not going to be no need for another Israelite to tell another Israelite to keep all of God's laws. Now let me show that this never changed, and that it never became opened up to any other nation when you read the New Testament or the New Covenant. This is Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 10. For this is the covenant that I'll make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I'll put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. Verse 12, for I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. So this is going to be given to the Israelites. Right now, when you go to Romans 11, you have these Christians try and go like this. They go like this. They go to Romans 11 and 13, right? And they'll read stuff like this. They'll say, Romans 11 and 13, for I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my own office. And then they go further and they read about where it mentions branches, which let me quickly jump to a verse 17. And there's some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them, and with them partakers of the root and fatness of the olive tree. So they'll take that to mean that that's somehow saying that a heathen can be gathered into the covenant of God, right? Which it doesn't mean that, because what you have to understand with this metaphor that's being used is that they're both olive trees. They're both olive trees. One's a natural olive tree and another one's a wild olive tree, but they're both olive trees. That's what people don't understand. You can't graft in a grape tree with an olive tree. You can't graft in an orange tree with an olive tree. It won't work. But you can graft in a olive tree with an olive tree. You can graft in an orange tree with another orange tree. The olive tree in this is the case represents being an Israelite, and let me prove it. Because after all of that said, right, after all of this talk about olive trees, branches, and all of that, right, look what's said afterwards. Verse 25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles become in. So that will be where a Christian will say, see, Gentiles are getting it too. No. Verse 26, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, that shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. So it's clearly letting you know that it's talking about the Gentiles being Israelites in this case, that they're talking about Israelites that was living the same ways as the Gentiles, which when you read the book of Maccabees, which people don't like to do, right, it clearly mentions about how it shows how the Israelites became Hellenized and how they became to follow after the lords of other people, after the lords of their oppressors. And if you look in the modern world right now, you can clearly see how that can happen. You can clearly see how a group of people can start following the ways and following the customs and wearing the attire of their oppressors. Because isn't that what happened to the Negro, Latino, and Native Americans? Isn't that what's happened to them? Aren't they trying to fight for the same laws now and fight for the rulership and fight for the rights of the same country that oppressed them? Aren't they following the same rituals and the same customs that those people put on them? Yes, they are. But people trying to act like it didn't happen back then, but it happened back then, and it's happened more in the modern times. So we can have an example to compare it to, man. Verse 26, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer that shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. So it mentions Gentiles in verse 25, but then it goes and just mention about all Israel being saved, and mentions ungodliness being turned away from Jacob, which this is a quote from Isaiah 59, the 59th chapter, and like the verse 18 to verse 20. Verse 27, for this is my covenant unto them when I shall take away their sins, which when I just read Hebrews 8 and 12, it speaks about how God's going to forgive the iniquities of the Israelites and remember it no more, right? So I've shown how the Israelites are going to keep God's laws. They're going to keep it perfectly, and there's not going to be a need for another Israelite to tell another Israelite to keep God's laws. Now, let me show how the heathen are going to keep God's laws, right? Let me show you how they're going to keep it. This is Daniel chapter 7 and verse 27. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him, right? And we're going to rule over these heathen nations with a rod of iron, meaning it's going to be a strict rulership. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 26, and he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As a vessel of a potter shall be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. So we're going to rule over these nations with a rod of iron. They're not going to be able to just go and float around doing whatever they want to do right now, like they do now. Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 2. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Yahweh's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. Isn't that what I just read about, how the kingdoms are going to be given to the people of the saints of the Most High? And let's see who the saints are of the Most High. Psalm 148 and verse 14. He also exalteth the horn of his people, the praise of all his saints, even of the children of Israel, a people near unto him, praise ye Yahweh. So people can't say that them saints is talking about all saints from all nations now. No, it's not. The saints are Israelites. Saying saints is another way of saying Israelite. It's just another different term, another way that you can speak about saying Israelite. Just like I was saying Jeshurun is another way you can speak about saying Israelites. Just like how saying Jerusalem in certain instances is another way you can say Israelite. Just like how saying children of Jacob is another way that you can say Israelite. Just like how saying elect is another way to mention about talking about Israelites. In particular, those Israelites that are predestined to receive salvation from the foundation of the world. Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 2. Going into how the heathen are going to keep the laws. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Yahweh's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, meaning the nations, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, come ye and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the power of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem, meaning another way of saying Israel. And he shall judge among the nations. Who's the he? Israel. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And this same thing is mentioned in Micah the 4th chapter, which let me go to it. Because whenever I read this, I normally read it from Isaiah, but let me read it from here. Micah chapter 4 and verse 1. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of Yahweh shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, which is another way of saying Israel again, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem, which is another way of saying Israel again. And he shall judge among and he shall judge among the people, and shall rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Simple as that. Simple as that. And this is how all the people in the world are going to keep all of God's laws. The Israelites are going to keep it naturally. It's going to become involuntary for them. The same way as I'm breathing right now and I'm not thinking about doing it. My heart's beating right now. I'm not thinking about doing it. My bronchioles, my alveoli, all the cells in my body that are supposed to work, they're working without me thinking about it, right? All the unconscious things that I'm doing, they're just naturally happening. That's the same way how Israelites are going to keep the laws in the kingdom. They're just going to naturally do it, man. You know, like how there's certain animals that are just naturally born being able to walk. That's how Israelites are going to naturally be born being righteous. They're just going to naturally know the ways to live according to Yahweh. And then anything outside of that, they're going to do. Anything that's outside of the constraints of the law, that's going to be there up to them then how they do that. They might like certain colors. They might be into different things, right? They're going to have unlimited time to experience every single thing on earth anyway. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 27. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. And that's how all dominions on the earth are going to obey him, right? And let me read this bit up here, in fact. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 22. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possess the kingdom. And that's what we're waiting for right now. We're waiting for that time right now where the saints are going to possess the kingdom, man. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44. And in the days of these kings, which he's talking about right now, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, which we're getting ready to be a part of, hopefully, man, Lord will, man. Right? We know that the elect are going to be a part of it, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Because you got a lot of people that their excuse for not keeping any laws is saying you can't keep it perfectly. But what the new covenant does is gets rid of that excuse, because that's what everyone that's supposed to, everyone that says that they're about the Bible is supposed to be desiring to be under that new covenant, and nobody's under it yet. Because if there was, you wouldn't see preachers standing in a box, right, screaming off at their mouth. You wouldn't have all these mega churches where they're rinsing out people's money. You wouldn't have anybody having the need to teach anybody about God anymore. You wouldn't have anybody that's part of the same group of people saying that they having to teach another person about the Bible anymore, man. You wouldn't have that. They'd all keep it perfectly. And there's not nowhere on this earth where you can see that people are keeping God's laws perfectly, which I find very strange, considering there's a people that people try and accept are the chosen in the land of the chosen, but they're not doing what the chosen would do. They're not teaching the laws, neither are they keeping it. I'll say it again. They're not teaching the laws, neither are they keeping it, which shows that that prophecy has not been fulfilled. And why is that if the chosen are in the land? Obviously, it's because the chosen are not in the land, isn't it? But yeah, that's the lesson, man. I just wanted to go into that and speak about how the day is going to come where the laws are going to be established on the earth, but there's going to be two different groups. There's going to be the Israelites that are going to be keeping it perfectly, and there's going to be the heathen that are going to be forced to keep it by the Israelites. Shalom to the elect of the nation of Israel, and all praises to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, B'Shem HaKadosh. Shalom.